In the stillness of the night, as the world quiets and the stars cast their ancient light upon the earth, there are stories that whisper through time, tales that carry the weight of centuries. Tonight, we journey into one such saga, a tale of faith, valor, and mystery that has captivated hearts for nearly a millennium. Picture a world of shadowed cloisters, of torchlit castles perched on rugged hills, where men clad in white mantles adorned with crimson crosses rode forth under sacred vows. These were the Knights Templar, warrior monks whose name echoes through history like a solemn prayer. Their story is not merely one of battles and conquests, but of devotion, sacrifice, and secrets that linger still in the mists of the past. Imagine yourself standing on a windswept hill in the Holy Land, the air thick with the scent of olive groves and the distant clash of steel. The year is 1120, and a small band of knights, bound by a sacred oath, has vowed to protect pilgrims journeying to Jerusalem. From these humble beginnings, the Templars would rise to wield power unmatched, their influence stretching from the courts of kings to the farthest reaches of Christendom. They were bankers, builders, warriors, and mystics, their lives woven into the tapestry of the Crusades. Yet their tale is also one of enigma, of hidden treasures, whispered conspiracies, and a fall so sudden it left the world reeling. This video is crafted to guide you gently into sleep, to cradle you in the soothing cadence of history's voice. As you listen, let the weight of the day slip away, replaced by visions of ancient stone fortresses and the soft hoofbeats of Templar steeds on desert sands. Each chapter of their story will unfold with care, drawing you deeper into a world where faith and sword met in a dance of destiny. So find a comfortable place, close your eyes, and let the past envelop you. Hello, my name is Sherry, and welcome to my channel. So let's begin. In the year 1119, as the sun rose over the golden stones of Jerusalem, the holy city stood as a beacon of faith, its walls scarred by the fervor of the First Crusade. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and myrrh, and the narrow streets echoed with the footsteps of pilgrims, their faces etched with devotion and weariness. These travelers had journeyed across seas and mountains, driven by a longing to kneel at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, to touch the sacred places where their Savior had walked. Yet the roads to Jerusalem were treacherous, winding through desolate hills and shadowed valleys where bandits and Saracen raiders lay in wait. For every soul who reached the city's gates, others fell to the sword or vanished into the wilderness, their prayers unanswered. It was in this fragile, fervent world that a knight named Hugues de Payens, a man of Champagne with a heart both pious and resolute, saw a calling. Picture him standing on the Mount of Olives, his cloak billowing in the warm desert wind, his eyes tracing the distant horizon where the Crusaders' banners still fluttered. Hugues was no stranger to war. He had fought in the First Crusade, witnessed the fall of Jerusalem in 1099, and seen the rivers of blood that flowed in its wake. But now, 2 decades later, he saw a different battle, not one of conquest, but of protection. The pilgrims, those weary souls who braved the perils of the journey, needed guardians. And so, with a small band of fellow knights, Hugues knelt before the Patriarch of Jerusalem and vowed to dedicate his life to their safety. This was the birth of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, a name that would one day be whispered with awe and fear. They were 9 in number, these first Templars, their armor worn and their purses light, bound not by wealth but by a shared vision. King Baldwin II, the Crusader king of Jerusalem, granted them a place to rest their heads, a wing of his palace, perched on the site believed to be the ancient Temple of Solomon. Imagine the scene, humble quarters of stone, the air cool and dim, where these knights gathered by candlelight, their voices low as they spoke of duty and sacrifice. The temple's ruins, sacred and weathered, seemed to hum with the weight of prophecy, as if the stones themselves blessed their cause. Hugues de Payens was a man of quiet intensity, his face lined by years of hardship, yet his eyes burned with purpose. He saw the Templars not merely as warriors, but as a bridge between the earthly and the divine, men who could wield the sword while carrying the cross. Their mission was simple yet profound: to safeguard the pilgrims who trod the sacred paths to Jerusalem, to ensure that faith could flourish even in a land torn by war. But in these early days, their means were meager. They relied on alms, their horses shared among them, their cloaks patched and threadbare. Picture them riding out at dawn, their silhouettes stark against the rising sun, scanning the hills for signs of danger. Each creak of leather, each clink of spur, was a testament to their resolve. The world they inhabited was one of stark contrasts. The Holy Land, bathed in the light of spiritual promise, was also a crucible of violence. The First Crusade had carved out fragile Christian kingdoms, Jerusalem, Antioch, Edessa, but these outposts were surrounded by enemies. Muslim forces, regrouping after their losses, struck with swift and merciless raids. Bandits, owing allegiance to no one, preyed on the vulnerable. The pilgrims, often unarmed and burdened with their worldly possessions, were easy targets. A merchant from Venice might lose his wares to a brigand's blade. A monk from Brittany might vanish into the desert, his fate unknown. The Templars, though few, rode into this chaos, their presence a flicker of hope amidst the shadows. Yet their task was daunting. 9 knights could not patrol every road, nor guard every caravan. Hugues knew their order needed more men, more resources, more legitimacy. He turned his gaze westward, to the courts of Europe, where the memory of the Crusades still stirred the hearts of kings and clergy. In 1120, he set sail for France, carrying with him a vision that would change the course of history. Imagine him aboard a creaking ship, the sea stretching endless before him, his thoughts a blend of prayer and strategy. He sought the blessing of the church, the support of nobles, and the means to transform his small band into a force that could stand as a bulwark against the perils of the Holy Land. The Templars' early days were marked by humility, but also by an audacious dream. They were not merely knights, they were a new kind of warrior, one who knelt in prayer as readily as he drew his sword. Their story, just beginning, was already woven into the fabric of a turbulent age, where faith and bloodshed walked hand in hand. As Hugues de Payens stepped onto European soil, he carried with him the weight of a sacred vow, and the hope that his order would rise to meet the challenges of a world on fire. But what trials awaited these knights, and what power would they wield in the years to come? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged hills of the Holy Land, the Knights Templar gathered in their modest quarters within the walls of Jerusalem. The air was thick with the scent of burning oil from flickering lamps, and the faint echo of evening prayers drifted from the nearby church of the Holy Sepulchre. It was here, in the quiet moments between their patrols, that the Templars forged the heart of their order, a sacred vow that bound them not only to each other, but to a higher calling. Picture them kneeling on the cool stone floor, their heads bowed, their hands clasped in solemn unity. These were men who had known the chaos of battle, yet now they sought something greater, a life where the sword served the soul, where every act of courage was an offering to God. Hugues de Payens, their founder, stood at the center of this fledgling brotherhood, his voice steady as he spoke of their purpose. The Templars were not to be mere soldiers, nor were they to emulate the monks cloistered in distant monasteries. They were to be both warrior monks, a paradox of steel and prayer, sworn to a code that would set them apart in an age of ambition and strife. In 1120, as their numbers remained small and their resources scarce, Hugues knew that their survival depended on a clear and unyielding framework. Thus was born the Templar rule, a set of precepts that would guide their lives with the precision of a master's blade. Imagine the scene as Hugues and his companions, their faces weathered by sun and hardship, debated the shape of this rule. They drew inspiration from the Benedictine monks, whose lives of discipline and devotion had long been a beacon in Christendom. Yet the Templars' path was unique. Their vows were 3: poverty, chastity, and obedience. Poverty meant they owned nothing, not the horse they rode, nor the cloak upon their back. All belonged to the order, a shared sacrifice that bound them as brothers. Chastity demanded they forsake earthly desires, their hearts reserved for their sacred mission. Obedience required them to follow their leaders without question, a chain of command as rigid as the walls of Jerusalem itself. But there was a 4th vow, unspoken yet ever present, to protect the pilgrims at all costs. Picture a lone Templar standing watch on a dusty road, his eyes scanning the horizon for the glint of a bandit's blade. His white cloak, still unadorned in these early days, fluttered in the breeze, a symbol of purity in a land stained by conflict. The pilgrims who passed under his gaze, merchants with their laden mules, priests clutching worn prayer books, families weary from months of travel, saw in him a guardian, a figure who stood between them and the perils of the wilderness. Yet for the Templars, this duty was not merely practical. It was a sacred act. Each life saved a testament to their faith. The spiritual fervor of the era shaped their every action. The 12th century was a time when the cross was both a symbol of salvation and a call to arms. The First Crusade had ignited a fire in the hearts of Christians across Europe, a belief that the Holy Land was theirs to reclaim and defend. The Templars embodied this zeal, but they channeled it into a disciplined purpose. Their days began before dawn, with prayers chanted in Latin, their voices rising in the pre-dawn chill. They trained relentlessly, their swords flashing in the courtyard as they honed the skills that would keep them alive in battle. Yet, unlike the knights of Europe, who fought for glory or land, the Templars fought for something intangible, a divine mandate that set their hearts ablaze. Their early struggles were many. With only 9 knights, their reach was limited, their patrols stretched thin across the vastness of the Holy Land. Resources were scarce. A single horse might carry 2 knights, a practice that would later become a symbol of their humility. Alms from sympathetic nobles kept them fed, but barely. Imagine the weight of their task. A handful of men tasked with guarding roads that stretched for miles, through deserts and mountains where danger lurked in every shadow. A single misstep could mean death, not just for them, but for the pilgrims they had sworn to protect. Yet, they persevered, driven by a conviction that their work was God's own. Hugues de Payens, ever the visionary, knew that their mission required more than courage. It demanded legitimacy, a blessing that could only come from the church itself. In 1128, he journeyed to the Council of Troyes, a gathering of bishops and abbots in the heart of France. There he stood before the assembled clergy, his voice steady but urgent, and pleaded the Templars' cause. Picture him, a knight in simple garb, speaking of the perils faced by pilgrims, of the need for a holy order to stand as their shield. His words found a champion in Bernard of Clairvaux, a monk whose influence rivaled that of kings. Bernard saw in the Templars a new ideal, a fusion of martial prowess and spiritual purity. With his support, the council would soon grant the Templars a formal rule, one that would elevate them from a band of knights to an order recognized by the church. This moment was a turning point, a spark that would ignite the Templars' rise. Yet, as they stood on the cusp of recognition, the challenges ahead loomed large. Their vows bound them to a life of hardship, but also to a purpose that burned brighter than the desert sun. As Hugues returned to Jerusalem, the weight of his mission settled upon him like a mantle. The Templars were no longer just a dream, they were a reality, poised to carve their name into the annals of history. But what trials would test their resolve, and how would their sacred vow shape the destiny of an order yet to find its true strength? As the winter of 1129 settled over the rolling hills of Troyes, a small city in the heart of Champagne, a gathering of robed clerics and stern-faced nobles filled the cathedral's shadowed halls. The air was thick with the scent of wax and incense, and the murmur of Latin prayers hung like a soft veil over the assembly. This was the Council of Troyes, a moment when the fate of the Knights Templar would be etched into the annals of Christendom. Hugues de Payens stood before the gathered bishops, his weathered hands clasped, his voice steady as he recounted the trials of his small band of knights in the Holy Land. The pilgrims they protected, the dangers they faced, the sacred vow that bound them, all were laid bare in a plea for recognition. And in that cold January light, the Templars received a gift that would define them, the blessing of the Church and a symbol that would become their own, the Crimson Cross. Imagine the scene as Bernard of Clairvaux, the revered abbot whose words could sway kings, rose to champion the Templars' cause. His eyes, sharp with conviction, saw in these warrior monks a new ideal for a turbulent age. Bernard was no stranger to the spiritual fire that burned in men's hearts. His own Cistercian order sought purity through simplicity. Yet the Templars were something else, a bold fusion of monk and knight, their lives a testament to discipline and sacrifice. With Bernard's guidance, the council crafted the Latin rule, a detailed code expanding the Templars' vows into a way of life. 72 clauses outline their duties, from the hours of prayer to the cut of their cloaks, ensuring their every act served their sacred mission. Central to their identity was the mantle they wore, a simple garment of white, symbolizing purity, adorned with a red cross that spoke of martyrdom and faith. Picture a Templar standing tall, his mantle catching the desert wind, the crimson cross bold against the pale fabric. This was no mere uniform, it was a declaration. The cross, granted by papal decree, marked them as soldiers of Christ, their purpose sanctified by the highest authority in the Christian world. In the streets of Jerusalem, where pilgrims marveled and locals whispered, the sight of that cross became a beacon of hope, a promise of protection in a land where danger never slept. The Latin rule shaped every facet of their lives. They rose before dawn, their voices joining in the chanting of matins, the words of psalms weaving through the cool air of their quarters. Their meals were simple: bread, water, perhaps a thin broth, eaten in silence as scripture was read aloud. Extravagance was forbidden. Their cloaks bore no fur, their armor no ornament. Even their speech was measured, laughter and idle talk deemed distractions from their purpose. Imagine a Templar's day: hours spent in prayer, training with sword and lance, or riding out to guard the roads to Jaffa or Bethlehem. Their discipline was ironclad, their lives a rhythm of devotion and duty. Yet the rule was not merely restrictive. It was a foundation for growth. The Templars' organization began to take shape, a structure as sturdy as the stone walls of Jerusalem. Hugues de Payens was named Grand Master, the first to bear a title that would carry the weight of legend. Beneath him, knights, sergeants, and chaplains formed a hierarchy, each role defined with precision. Knights, drawn from the nobility, were the order's backbone, their skill in battle unmatched. Sergeants, often of humbler birth, served as squires or foot soldiers, their loyalty no less fierce. Chaplains tended to the Templars' souls, ensuring their spiritual path remained true. Picture their ranks assembling in the courtyard of the Temple Mount, their white mantles a stark contrast to the dust-stained armor of other crusaders. The Council of Troyes did more than grant the Templars legitimacy. It opened the gates of Europe to their cause. Bernard's endorsement carried weight, and soon nobles and knights flocked to join or support the order. Donations poured in: land, gold, horses, each gift a brick in the foundation of their growing power. A knight from Anjou might pledge his sword. A lord from Normandy might offer a manor. In return, the Templars promised not wealth or glory, but a chance to serve God's will. Imagine a young noble, his heart stirred by tales of the Holy Land, kneeling before Hugues to take the vow, his life forever changed by the crimson cross he would wear. In the Holy Land, the Templars' presence grew stronger. Their patrols expanded, their outposts dotted the roads to sacred sites. A pilgrim traveling from Acre to Jerusalem might see a Templar banner in the distance, a sign that safety was near. Yet their numbers were still few, their resources stretched thin. The roads remained perilous, and the Saracen threat loomed ever closer. Each dawn brought new challenges, each night new prayers for strength. The Templars' mission was clear, but their path was fraught with uncertainty. They were no longer just a band of knights. They were an order, recognized and revered, yet tested by the weight of their own ambition. As the years passed, the Crimson Cross became a symbol known across Christendom, a mark of courage and sacrifice. But with recognition came expectation, and with expectation, the seeds of envy. The Templars' rise was swift, their mission noble, but the world they served was one of shifting alliances and hidden motives. As they rode forth under their new banner, the future stretched before them like an uncharted road, full of promise and peril. What battles awaited these knights, and how would their sacred symbol guide them through the storms to come? The sun hung low over the rugged hills of the Levant, painting the sky in hues of amber, and rose as a small band of Templar knights rode single file along a dusty trail. Their white mantles, emblazoned with the crimson cross, fluttered faintly in the warm breeze, and the clink of their armor mingled with the soft thud of hooves on packed earth. Below them, a caravan of pilgrims wound through the valley, their voices a low hum of prayers and murmurs, their eyes fixed on the distant spires of Jerusalem. It was the 1130s, and the Knights Templar, now fortified by the Church's blessing, had become the steadfast guardians of these weary travelers. Each step they took, each glance across the horizon, was a testament to their sacred vow to shield the faithful in a land where faith itself was a battleground. Picture a Templar knight, his face shadowed beneath a helmet, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. The road to Jerusalem was no mere path. It was a gauntlet of danger, where rocky defiles hid bandits and the distant thunder of hooves could signal a Saracen raid. The pilgrims they protected were a diverse throng. Merchants from Venice with their bundles of silks, monks from distant monasteries clutching relics, families who had sold all they owned for this sacred journey. Each carried dreams of salvation, but also the weight of fear. A single ambush could turn devotion into despair, and the Templars were their shield, their presence a quiet promise that the holy city might yet be reached. Their days were long, their vigilance unyielding. Imagine a Templar outpost, a small stone tower perched on a windswept ridge, its walls scarred by the elements. Here, the knights gathered at dawn, their breath visible in the cool air as they checked their gear and whispered prayers. They rode out in pairs or small groups, their routes carefully planned to cover the main pilgrim roads, from Jaffa to Jerusalem, from Acre to Nazareth. A typical patrol might stretch for hours, the knights scanning the hills for signs of trouble. A glint of steel, a puff of dust, the sudden flight of birds. When danger struck, their response was swift and disciplined, their swords drawn with a precision honed by years of training. The Templars' bravery was not born of recklessness, but of a deep, disciplined resolve. Their rule demanded they fight only to protect, never for glory. Picture a skirmish in a narrow pass where a band of bandits descends upon a caravan. The Templars, outnumbered, form a tight line, their shields raised, their horses steady. A knight might shout a command in Latin, his voice cutting through the chaos as they drive back the attackers. Blood stains the earth, but the pilgrims are spared, their journey unbroken. Such moments were not uncommon, and each victory, however small, added to the Templars' growing legend. Beyond the roads, the Templars began to establish fortified outposts, strongholds that stood as bulwarks against the chaos of the Holy Land. Imagine a fortress like Tortosa, its walls rising from the coastal cliffs, or Safed, perched high in the Galilean hills. These were not grand castles in the European style, but practical bastions, their stone hewn from the land itself. Within, the Templars lived simply, sleeping on straw pallets, eating sparse meals, their days punctuated by prayer and drill. These outposts served as safe havens for pilgrims, places to rest and replenish before continuing their journey. A weary traveler might find shelter behind those walls, their heart eased by the sight of the crimson cross fluttering above. The Templars' role extended beyond mere protection. They became guides, advisors, even mediators in a land fractured by competing powers. The Crusader kingdoms, Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, were fragile, their rulers often at odds. The Templars, bound by their vows and their growing reputation, stood apart, their loyalty to the Church and the pilgrims above earthly politics. A knight might escort a nobleman's caravan, then kneel in prayer beside a peasant, his mantle a symbol of equality in service. Their impartiality earned them respect, but also whispers of pride, as some began to see their independence as a challenge to authority. Their numbers grew slowly but steadily. The Council of Troyes had opened the doors to new recruits, and men from across Europe answered the call. A knight from Aragon might arrive with his horse and armor, drawn by tales of the Templars' valor. A sergeant, perhaps a blacksmith's son from Flanders, might join to serve as a squire or guard. Each took the vow, their lives reshaped by the rule. Yet, even as their ranks swelled, the challenges of the Holy Land remained daunting. The Muslim forces, led by figures like Zengi, were regrouping, their raids growing bolder. The Templars' outposts, though strong, were isolated, their supply lines vulnerable. Every day was a test of endurance, every night a prayer for strength. As the 1130s drew to a close, the Templars stood as a beacon in a turbulent land. Their courage and discipline had saved countless lives, their crimson cross a symbol of hope to those who journeyed to the holy sites. But the Holy Land was a crucible, its fires never quenched. The Templars' mission was clear, but the cost was heavy. Each knight carried the weight of lives saved and lost, of a vow that demanded everything. As they rode into the gathering dusk, their shadows long upon the earth, a question lingered. How long could they stand against the rising tide of conflict, and what new trials awaited in the wars to come? As the 1140s dawned, the hills of the Holy Land shimmered under a relentless sun, their slopes dotted with the white mantles of the Knights Templar, their crimson crosses catching the light like embers. The air carried the faint tang of salt from the distant Mediterranean, mingling with the dust kicked up by pilgrim caravans and the hooves of Templar steeds. The Order, once a humble band of 9, had grown into a force revered across Christendom. Their outposts stood sentinel over the roads to Jerusalem, their name whispered in awe by pilgrims and nobles alike. Yet, it was not only their swords that forged their legend. It was their ability to weave themselves into the very fabric of a fractured world, becoming trusted allies to kings, advisors to popes, and guardians of a faith that burned bright in an age of uncertainty. Picture a Templar knight riding alongside a royal entourage, his posture erect, his gaze steady. The Crusader kingdoms, Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, were islands in a sea of conflict, their rulers navigating a delicate balance of diplomacy and war. The Templars, bound by their sacred vows, stood apart from the squabbles of noble houses, their loyalty to the church and their mission unwavering. This impartiality made them invaluable. A king might seek their counsel on matters of strategy, trusting their discipline over the ambitions of courtly knights. A bishop might turn to them to safeguard a sacred relic, knowing their devotion was untainted by greed. In the courts of Europe and the Levant, the Templars were becoming more than warriors. They were pillars of stability in a world on edge. Their influence grew through alliances forged with care. Imagine a grand hall in Paris, its walls hung with tapestries, where a Templar envoy kneels before King Louis VII of France. The Second Crusade was brewing, a response to the fall of Edessa in 1144, and the Templars were at its heart. Their knowledge of the Holy Land, its terrain, its dangers, its politics was unmatched. Louis, young and fervent, saw in them not just fighters but strategists. The Templars guided his armies, their scouts mapping routes through treacherous deserts, their knights bolstering the Crusader ranks. When the crusade faltered, bogged down by missteps and defeats, it was the Templars who held the line, their discipline a beacon amidst chaos. Their role in the campaign earned them the gratitude of kings and the admiration of a continent. Yet their rise was not built on battles alone. The Templars were masters of connection, their network stretching from the Levant to the farthest corners of Europe. Picture a ship docking at Acre, its hold filled with supplies donated by a Castilian lord, or a manor in England gifted to the order by a pious baron. The Council of Troyes had opened the floodgates, and donations poured in: land, gold, vineyards, mills. Each gift strengthened the Templars, allowing them to expand their outposts and recruit new knights. A young noble from Provence might arrive in Jerusalem, his heart stirred by tales of the order's valor, ready to take the vow. A merchant in Bruges might offer a tithe, believing his coin would aid the defense of the Holy Sepulchre. The Templars' wealth grew, but so did their responsibility. Their role as financiers began to take shape, a precursor to their later fame as bankers. Imagine a pilgrim at a Templar preceptory, his hands trembling as he hands over a purse of coins. In return, he receives a letter, a promise that his wealth awaits him in Jerusalem. This early form of credit, simple yet revolutionary, allowed travelers to journey without fear of robbery. The Templars' reputation for honesty made them trusted custodians, their preceptories safe havens for gold and goods. Kings and nobles, too, began to entrust their treasures to the order, knowing the Crimson Cross guaranteed security. This financial acumen, born of necessity, set the Templars apart, their ledgers as vital as their swords. In the Holy Land, their military presence grew stronger. Picture the fortress of Gaza, its walls rising from the desert, manned by Templar knights who stood watch over the southern frontier. Their outposts were no longer mere shelters but strategic strongholds, their garrisons ready to ride at a moment's notice. They fought alongside other Crusader forces, their tactics honed by years of skirmishes. A Templar charge was a fearsome sight, knights in tight formation, their lances lowered, their horses thundering as one. Yet their victories were tempered by the realities of war. The Muslim forces, led by commanders like Nur ad-Din, were relentless, their armies growing in strength. Each battle tested the Templars' resolve, each loss a reminder of the fragility of the Crusader kingdoms. Their growing power brought new challenges. In Europe, their wealth and influence began to stir whispers. A lord might admire their piety but envy their landholdings. A bishop might praise their devotion but question their independence. The Templars, loyal to the Pope, answered to no king, and this autonomy set them apart and made them targets. In the Holy Land, their role as advisors placed them at the heart of political intrigues, where alliances shifted like sand. Yet, they remained steadfast, their crimson crosses a symbol of a mission that transcended earthly power. As the Second Crusade faded into memory, the Templars stood taller than ever, their name synonymous with courage and trust. They had become more than guardians of pilgrims. They were architects of a new order, their influence felt in courts and battlefields alike. But with power came scrutiny, and with scrutiny, the first faint shadows of doubt. As they rode beneath their banners, the weight of their vows grew heavier, their path more perilous. What battles lay ahead, and how would their rising star shape the turbulent years to come? In the fading light of a summer evening in the 1150s, a Templar preceptory in Acre stood as a quiet fortress, its stone walls glowing faintly under the setting sun. Within, a knight sat at a sturdy oak table, his quills scratching across parchment as he recorded a transaction. A deposit of gold from a Genoese merchant, bound for Jerusalem. The air was cool, scented with the salt of the nearby sea and the faint musk of ink and wax. Outside, the clatter of hooves and the murmur of pilgrims filled the courtyard, but here, in this modest chamber, the Knights Templar were weaving a new kind of power, one not of swords, but of coin. Their white mantles and crimson crosses were now symbols not only of martial valor, but of a financial acumen that would reshape the medieval world. Imagine a pilgrim, his cloak dusty from weeks of travel, approaching a Templar outpost. His hands clutch a purse heavy with silver, but the roads to the Holy Land are treacherous, and bandits lurk in every shadow. He hands his wealth to a Templar clerk who issues a coded letter, a promise that the sum awaits him at journey's end. This simple act, born of necessity, was the seed of a revolutionary system. The Templars had become the guardians not only of lives, but of wealth, their preceptories a network of trust stretching from the shores of the Levant to the courts of Europe. A merchant in Paris could deposit gold with the Templars and retrieve it in Antioch. A noble in London could fund a crusade without carrying a single coin. This was the birth of early banking, a system so innovative it seemed almost miraculous in an age of barter and mistrust. The Templars' financial prowess grew from their unique position. Bound by vows of poverty, they owned nothing as individuals, but the order itself amassed wealth through donations. Land, manors, vineyards, even entire villages. Picture a lord in Castile, his heart stirred by tales of the Holy Land, signing over a fertile estate to the Templars. Or a widow in Flanders, offering a tithe of her late husband's gold to aid the order's mission. These gifts, granted in the name of faith, transformed the Templars into one of the wealthiest institutions in Christendom. Their preceptories, once humble outposts, became hubs of commerce, their vaults filled with the treasures of nobles and kings. Their system was meticulous. Imagine a Templar treasurer, his brow furrowed as he balances ledgers by candlelight. Every transaction was recorded, every letter of credit carefully coded to prevent fraud. The Templars' reputation for honesty was their greatest asset. A king might mistrust his own vassals, but the Crimson Cross was a guarantee of integrity. This trust allowed them to act as financiers to the powerful. King Louis VII of France, burdened by debts from the Second Crusade, turned to the Templars for loans. his crown's coffers replenished by their gold. Even popes relied on their services, entrusting them with the collection of papal taxes. The Templars' wealth was not merely coin, it was influence, a currency that bought them a voice in the halls of power. In the Holy Land, their financial strength supported their military mission. Picture the port of Acre, its docks bustling with ships unloading supplies for the Crusader kingdoms. The Templars' gold purchased horses, armor, and provisions, ensuring their knights could ride out to protect pilgrims or bolster a faltering garrison. Their preceptories, like those at Tortosa or Chastel-Blanc, were fortified not just with stone, but with the resources to withstand sieges. A Templar knight, his armor gleaming, might owe his steed to a donation from a distant lord, his sword sharpened by the profits of a Templar manor in Provence. Their wealth was a lifeline, sustaining their sacred vow in a land where war never ceased. Yet, this wealth came with a shadow. The Templars' vow of poverty was absolute for the individual knight, but the order's growing riches sparked whispers. In the courts of Europe, where envy was as common as ambition, some began to eye the Templars with suspicion. A baron might admire their discipline but resent their landholdings, larger than his own. A merchant might rely on their services but murmur about their tax exemptions, granted by papal decree. The Templars' independence, once their strength, now made them seem untouchable, a power apart from kings and bishops. In the Holy Land, their wealth allowed them to act with boldness, but it also drew the gaze of those who coveted their success. Their financial innovations extended beyond banking. The Templars managed vast estates, their lands cultivated by tenants who paid rents in grain or coin. They operated mills, markets, even shipyards, their enterprises fueling the Crusader economy. Picture a Templar ship, its sails catching the wind as it carries supplies from Cyprus to Jaffa, its hull marked with the Crimson Cross. These ventures were not for profit but for purpose, every penny funneled back into their mission. Yet the scale of their operations was staggering, their preceptories a network of economic power that rivaled the greatest noble houses. As the 1160s approached, the Templars stood at the zenith of their influence, their wealth a cornerstone of their strength. They were no longer just knights. They were stewards of a vast enterprise, their ledgers as vital as their lances. But with every coin they amassed, the whispers grew louder, whispers of pride, of secrecy, of a power too great for mortal hands. The Templars, bound by their sacred vow, saw their wealth as a tool for God's work, but others saw only the gleam of gold. As their star rose higher, the question lingered. How long could they balance their sacred mission with the temptations of worldly power, and what forces waited to challenge their dominion? In the heart of the Holy Land, where the sun scorched the earth and the wind carried whispers of ancient prophecies, the Knights Templar raised walls of stone that stood as defiant as their faith. It was the 1160s, and the rugged hills of Syria and Palestine were dotted with their fortresses, silent sentinels that loomed over dusty valleys and guarded the paths of pilgrims. Picture the great castle of Crusades Chevaliers, its towers piercing the sky, its ramparts gleaming white against the ochre landscape. These were not mere buildings, but monuments to the Templars' resolve, their architecture a blend of ingenuity and devotion, crafted to withstand both the sword and the sands of time. Imagine standing at the base of such a fortress, your eyes tracing the massive stone blocks, each one hewn with precision and fitted without mortar. The air is warm, scented with wild thyme and the faint tang of smoke from a distant village. Above, the Crimson Cross flutters on a banner, a stark contrast to the fortress's austere walls. These castles, Crusades Chevaliers, Chastel-Blanc, Tortosa, were more than military outposts. They were sanctuaries where the Templars lived their dual lives as monks and warriors. Within, the halls echoed with the chant of prayers at dawn, the clatter of armor in the courtyard, and the soft scratch of quills as clerks recorded the order's growing wealth. The Templars' castles were marvels of medieval engineering, born of necessity and honed by experience. Picture a knight standing atop a battlement, his gaze sweeping the horizon for signs of a Saracen army. The walls beneath his feet were designed with cunning. Rounded towers to deflect siege engines, narrow slits for archers to rain arrows on attackers, and hidden posterns for swift counterattacks. The Templars learned from both their allies and their enemies, blending Frankish designs with the intricate fortifications of the East. A castle like Safed, perched high in the Galilean hills, could house hundreds of knights and sergeants, its storerooms stocked with grain and water to withstand months of siege. These strongholds were lifelines, ensuring the Crusader kingdoms could hold against the rising tide of Muslim forces. Building such fortresses was a labor of faith. Imagine a Templar overseeing a construction site, his white mantle dusted with limestone as he directs masons hauling blocks up ramps. The order's wealth, amassed through donations, and their early banking system funded these endeavors. A lord in Aragon might gift a quarry's worth of stone. A merchant in Venice might send timber for gates. Local laborers, Christian and Muslim alike, toiled under the Templars' watchful eyes, their work uniting disparate hands in a common cause. The result was a network of castles that stretched from the Mediterranean coast to the Jordan River, each one a testament to the Templars' growing power and their commitment to the Holy Land. These fortresses served multiple roles. They were garrisons, housing knights ready to ride out at a moment's notice. Picture a dawn muster, the courtyard filled with the snort of horses and the gleam of polished steel as Templars prepare for a patrol. They were also refuges for pilgrims, offering shelter to those weary from the journey to Jerusalem. A family from Brittany might rest within the cool shadows of Tortosa's walls, their fears eased by the presence of the Crimson Cross. Some castles, like Crac des Chevaliers, were administrative hubs, where Templar clerks managed the order's estates and finances, their ledgers tracking the flow of gold from Europe to the Levant. The Templars' architectural legacy extended beyond the Holy Land. In Europe, their preceptories, smaller fortified compounds, dotted the landscape from Portugal to Poland. Imagine a preceptory in the rolling hills of Provence, its chapels stained glass casting colored light on a stone floor. These were not just administrative centers, but symbols of the order's reach, places where knights trained, recruits took their vows, and donations were collected. The design of these preceptories often mirrored their eastern castles, with thick walls and defensible gates, a reminder that the Templars' mission was ever tied to readiness, even in peaceful lands. Yet the construction and maintenance of these fortresses came at a cost. The Templars' wealth, while vast, was stretched thin by the demands of war and building. A single castle could take years to complete, draining resources that might have funded more knights or ships. In the Holy Land, the constant threat of siege meant every fortress had to be self-sufficient, its wells deep and its granaries full. The Templars' engineers became masters of water management, digging cisterns that could sustain a garrison through the driest months. Picture a knight inspecting a hidden reservoir, his torchlight dancing on the still water, knowing that this ingenuity might mean the difference between life and death. The fortresses also shaped the Templars' reputation. To pilgrims, they were havens. To enemies, they were impregnable threats. Muslim chroniclers like Ibn al-Athir wrote of the Templars' castles with grudging respect, noting their strength and the courage of those within. Yet in Europe, the grandeur of these structures fueled whispers. A noble might marvel at Crac des Chevaliers, but resent the Templars' wealth, wondering how an order sworn to poverty could command such resources. These murmurs, still faint in the 1160s, hinted at the challenges to come, as the Templars' success began to breed envy. As the sun set over their stone strongholds, the Templars stood as masters of both war and architecture, their castles a physical embodiment of their sacred vow. Each block laid was a prayer, each tower raised a defiance of the chaos that surrounded them. But the Holy Land was a land of shifting sands, where no fortress, however mighty, could stand unchallenged forever. As the Templars looked out from their battlements, the horizon held both promise and peril. What battles would test these walls, and how would the order's strength be measured in the crucible of war? As the 1170s cast their golden light over the Holy Land, the air trembled with the distant rumble of war. The hills of Galilee, dusted with olive groves and scarred by ancient battles, bore witness to the Knights Templar at the height of their martial prowess. Picture a Templar knight, his white mantle stained with the dust of the road, his crimson cross vivid against the backdrop of a blood-red sunset. His hand grips a lance, his horse snorts beneath him, and his eyes scan the horizon for the glint of Saracen steel. The Templars were no longer just guardians of pilgrims. They were the spearhead of the Crusader armies, their blades forged in the fire of faith, their courage a beacon in a land where hope was as fleeting as the morning mist. The Holy Land in this era was a crucible of conflict. The Crusader kingdoms, Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, stood as fragile outposts, surrounded by the rising power of Muslim leaders like Nur ad-Din and his successor, Saladin. The Templars, with their disciplined ranks and fortified castles, were the backbone of the Christian defense. Imagine a battlefield near Ascalon, the air thick with the cries of men and the clash of steel. The Templars ride in tight formation, their horses thundering as one, their lances lowered in a deadly arc. Their tactics were precise, honed by years of skirmishes, a swift charge to break enemy lines, a disciplined retreat to regroup, a relentless focus on protecting their comrades. To see them in battle was to witness a machine of war, each knight a cog in a greater purpose. Their role in the Crusades was pivotal, nowhere more so than in the catastrophic Battle of Hattin in 1187. Picture the scene. A scorching July day, the hills above the Sea of Galilee shimmering with heat. The Crusader army, led by King Guy of Jerusalem, marched toward Tiberias, their throats parched, their armor heavy. The Templars, under Grand Master Gerard de Ridefort, formed the vanguard, their white mantles a stark contrast to the dust-choked air. Saladin's forces, vast and disciplined, lay in wait, their archers peppering the Crusaders with arrows, their cavalry harrying their flanks. The Templars fought with ferocity, their swords flashing as they held the line, but the odds were overwhelming. Water was scarce, morale faltered, and the Crusader army crumbled. Many Templars fell that day, their bodies left on the field, their crimson crosses stained with blood. Hattin was a turning point, a wound that bled the Crusader kingdoms dry. Jerusalem itself fell to Saladin soon after, its sacred sites lost to Christian hands. The Templars, though battered, did not break. Imagine a surviving knight, his armor dented, his face lined with grief, kneeling in a makeshift chapel within the walls of Tyre. He prays not for victory, but for strength to continue the fight. The loss at Hattin was a stark reminder of the cost of war, yet it also burnished the Templars' legend. Their courage in the face of defeat, their refusal to yield, became a rallying cry for the Third Crusade, drawing new knights and resources from Europe to reclaim what was lost. Their military tactics were a blend of discipline and innovation. Picture a Templar training ground, where knights practice maneuvers under the watchful eye of a marshal. They learned to fight as a unit, their charges synchronized, their shields forming an unbreakable wall. They adopted techniques from their Muslim foes, using light cavalry for swift raids and mastering the art of defensive formations. Their castles, like Crac des Chevaliers, were not just fortresses but bases for operations, their garrisons ready to strike at a moment's notice. A Templar knight might ride out to harass a Saracen supply line, his horse swift and silent, returning before dawn to report to his commander. Yet the cost of war was heavy. Each battle drained the order's resources, each fallen knight a loss not easily replaced. Imagine a Templar burial, a quiet ceremony at dusk, the body wrapped in a white mantle and laid in a simple grave. The surviving brothers chant psalms, their voices low, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that more battles await. The Templars' vow bound them to fight until death, but it also bound them to a life of sacrifice. Their wealth, vast though it was, went to repair castles, buy horses, and arm new recruits. Their preceptories in Europe worked tirelessly, sending gold and men to the Holy Land, but the tide of war was relentless. The Templars' role in these campaigns made them indispensable, but also exposed their vulnerabilities. Their independence, once a strength, now drew criticism. Some Crusader lords blamed them for the failures at Hattin, whispering that their pride had clouded their judgment. In Europe, their martial fame grew, but so did the murmurs of those who envied their power. A king might praise their valor but resent their autonomy. A bishop might honor their faith but question their losses. The Templars, steadfast in their mission, paid little heed to such talk, but the seeds of doubt were sown. As the 1180s drew to a close, the Templars stood as both heroes and scapegoats, their blades bloodied but unbowed. They had fought with unmatched courage, their crimson crosses a symbol of defiance in a land torn by war. Yet, the fall of Jerusalem and the losses at Hattin cast a long shadow. The Holy Land, once a beacon of hope, was slipping from their grasp, and the Templars faced a future fraught with uncertainty. As they sharpened their swords and rebuilt their ranks, a question hung heavy in the air. Could their courage hold against the gathering storm, or would the weight of war bring even these mighty knights to their knees? As the 1190s cast their restless light over the Holy Land, the Knights Templar stood as titans amidst the turmoil of the Third Crusade. Their fortresses loomed like silent giants over the hills of Acre and Tyre, their crimson crosses fluttering defiantly in the wind. Picture a Templar knight, his white mantle frayed from battle, riding through the narrow streets of a Crusader city, his presence both a comfort and a challenge to those who watched. The Templars had become indispensable, warriors, financiers, advisors. Yet their very strength sowed the seeds of envy, their independence a spark that kindled suspicion in the hearts of kings and clerics. The air, once filled with the chant of their prayers, now carried whispers of resentment, faint but growing, like shadows creeping across a sunlit plain. Imagine the scene in Acre, newly reclaimed by the Crusaders in 1191 after a grueling siege. The city's walls, scarred by catapult stones, stand as a testament to the Templars' valor, their knights having fought alongside Richard the Lionheart to wrest it from Saladin's grasp. Within the city, a Templar preceptory hums with activity. Clerks tally donations, armorers mend dented shields, and knights prepare for the next campaign. Their wealth and discipline have made them the backbone of the crusade, their coffers funding ships and supplies, their swords cutting through enemy ranks. Yet, as they move through the crowded markets, heads turn, not all with admiration. A Frankish lord might nod respectfully, but harbor unease at the Templars' vast estates. A merchant might rely on their banking, but mutter about their tax exemptions. The Templars' independence was their greatest asset and their growing liability. Bound only to the Pope, they answered to no king or local bishop, a privilege granted by the Church's decrees. Picture a council in Jerusalem, where nobles debate strategy under the flickering light of torches. A Templar commander, his voice calm but firm, offers counsel that sways the room, his words carrying the weight of experience and papal backing. Yet some lords shift uncomfortably, their pride stung by the order's influence. Why should these warrior monks, sworn to poverty, hold lands richer than their own? Why should they, who kneel to no crown, wield such power? These questions, once mere murmurs, began to echo in the halls of power, from the courts of France to the palaces of England. In Europe, the Templars' wealth was a beacon that drew both devotion and distrust. Imagine a preceptory in the lush valleys of Champagne, its fields yielding harvests that rival those of any noble house. Donations continued to flow, gold from a Spanish count, a mill from an English baron, but each gift widened the gap between the Templars' vow of poverty and their visible riches. A knight might live simply, his meals sparse and his bed a straw pallet, but the order's vaults were heavy with coin, its estates sprawling across continents. To the faithful, this was a sign of God's favor. To the envious, it was a provocation. Bishops, whose own coffers paled in comparison, began to whisper of arrogance. Nobles, indebted to the Templars' loans, grumbled about their influence over kings. The Templars' role as financiers only deepened these tensions. Picture a royal court in Paris, where King Philip Augustus seeks a loan to fund his campaigns. A Templar envoy, his mantle pristine, presents a letter of credit, his demeanor one of quiet confidence. The transaction is swift, the terms fair, but the king's advisors exchange glances. The Templars' banking system, now a marvel of efficiency, allowed them to move wealth across Christendom with ease. A pilgrim in Lisbon could deposit gold and withdraw it in Damascus. A Crusader lord could borrow funds to arm his men. This power made the Templars indispensable, but it also made them targets. A debtor might praise their reliability in public, but resent their hold over his purse in private. In the Holy Land, the Templars' military commitments added fuel to the fire. Their castles, like Crac des Chevaliers, were strongholds of resistance, but their losses at battles like Hattin lingered in memory. Some blamed the Templars for the Crusaders' failures, whispering that their pride had led to reckless decisions. Picture a knight returning from a failed campaign, his armor battered, his eyes haunted. He kneels in a chapel, seeking solace, but outside, the murmurs grow louder. Were the Templars too bold, too independent? Did their wealth blind them to the needs of the broader crusade? These accusations, often unfair, found fertile ground in a land where defeat bred bitterness. The Church, too, began to cast a wary eye. While the Pope remained their protector, local clergy sometimes chafed at the Templars' privileges. Their exemption from tithes, granted by papal bulls, rankled bishops who struggled to fund their dioceses. Imagine a heated exchange in a cathedral cloister, where a bishop questions a Templar's authority, only to be met with a calm reminder of their papal mandate. Such moments, though rare, hinted at a growing divide. The Templars' loyalty to Rome was unshakable, but it set them apart from the intricate web of feudal loyalties that bound the medieval world. Yet, the Templars pressed on, their mission undeterred. Picture a knight standing watch on a fortress wall, the night sky vast above him, his thoughts a blend of prayer and vigilance. The envy of others was a distant concern compared to the immediate dangers of the Holy Land, where Saladin's armies still threatened and the Crusader kingdoms hung by a thread. The Templars' wealth and power were tools, not ends, tools to protect pilgrims, to fortify castles, to sustain their sacred vow. But as their star rose higher, the shadows of envy grew longer, their whispers sharper. The order stood at a crossroads, their strength a double-edged sword that both shielded and exposed them. As the Third Crusade drew to a close, leaving Jerusalem still in Muslim hands, the Templars faced a world where their every triumph seemed to invite new foes. What trials awaited these knights, and how would the gathering shadows shape their destiny? As the 1190s waned, the Holy Land lay under a heavy sky, its horizons bruised with the smoke of distant battles. The Knights Templar, their white mantles now a familiar sight across the Crusader kingdoms, stood resolute amidst a world unraveling. Picture a Templar knight atop the walls of Acre, his crimson cross catching the faint light of dawn, his eyes tracing the coastline where ships brought dwindling reinforcements. The Third Crusade had ended in a fragile truce, Jerusalem still in Saladin's hands, and the Crusader states, once proud outposts of Christendom, were shrinking like shadows at noon. The Templars, guardians of the faith, faced a tide that was turning against them, their mission tested by losses that cut deeper than any sword. Imagine the scene in 1191, as the Crusaders, led by Richard the Lionheart, reclaimed Acre after a brutal siege. The Templars fought with their characteristic ferocity, their lances breaking enemy lines, their banners a rallying point amidst the chaos. Yet, victory was bittersweet. Jerusalem remained beyond reach, and the truce with Saladin allowed pilgrims access to the Holy City but left it under Muslim control. For the Templars, sworn to protect the sacred sites, this was a wound to the soul. Picture a knight kneeling in the chapel of their new headquarters in Acre, the air heavy with incense, his prayers a quiet plea for strength. The loss of Jerusalem, the heart of their mission, was a blow that echoed through their ranks, a reminder that their vow was both a shield and a burden. The Crusader states were crumbling. Antioch and Tripoli clung to existence, their borders harried by Muslim forces now united under Saladin's banner. The Templars' fortresses, Crac des Chevaliers, Tortosa, Safed, stood as islands of resistance, but their garrisons were stretched thin. Imagine a Templar commander pacing the battlements, his face etched with worry as he tallies his men. Supplies were scarce, horses fewer, and the flow of recruits from Europe slowed as the fervor of the early Crusades faded. The Order's wealth, though vast, could not buy back the lost cities or stem the tide of Saladin's armies. Each patrol sent out to guard pilgrims risked returning with fewer knights, their losses a silent toll that weighed on every heart. Their role as protectors grew ever more perilous. Picture a caravan winding through the hills of Judea, pilgrims clutching crosses and whispering prayers as Templar knights ride alongside. The roads, once merely dangerous, were now deadly, with Muslim raiders striking from the shadows. A Templar might spot a glint of steel in the distance, his hand tightening on his sword as he signals his brothers to form a defensive line. These skirmishes were frequent, each one a test of the Templars' discipline and courage. A single mistake could mean the slaughter of those they had sworn to protect, and the weight of that responsibility hung heavy. Yet they rode on, their crimson crosses a defiant promise to the faithful. In Europe, the Templars' struggles were felt as ripples in a distant pond. Their preceptories, from London to Lisbon, continued to manage vast estates, their clerks recording the flow of gold that sustained the Holy Land's defenses. Imagine a Templar treasurer in Paris, his quill pausing as he reads a letter from Acre, detailing the latest losses. Donations still came, land from a German count, coin from a Sicilian merchant, but the enthusiasm of earlier decades was waning. The Third Crusade had stirred hearts, but its failures cooled them. Nobles who once pledged their sons to the order now hesitated, their faith shaken by the news of Jerusalem's fall. The Templars' call for support, once a clarion, now sounded like a plea. Their independence, once a source of strength, became a point of friction. Picture a council in Tyre, where Crusader lords debate the next campaign. A Templar commander, his voice steady, urges caution, his knowledge of the terrain unmatched. Yet some lords bristle, their pride stung by the order's influence. The Templars' loyalty to the Pope set them apart, their council often overriding local ambitions. This autonomy, granted by papal bulls, made them indispensable but also isolated. A king might rely on their loans, but resent their refusal to bow to his will. A bishop might seek their protection, but chafe at their exemptions from his authority. The Templars, steadfast in their mission, ignored these tensions, but they could not outrun them. The order's internal challenges grew as well. The loss of Jerusalem forced a shift in focus, their headquarters now in Acre, a bustling port city that hummed with trade and intrigue. Imagine the Templar compound there, its walls ringing with the clatter of armor and the murmur of prayer. New recruits, drawn by tales of glory, found a reality far grimmer, a life of constant vigilance, where every dawn might bring news of another lost outpost. The Templars' rule, with its strict discipline, held them together, but the strain was evident. A knight might confess his doubts to a chaplain, his voice low, wondering if their cause was still God's will. As the century turned, the Templars faced a world transformed. The Crusader kingdoms were shadows of their former selves, their borders shrinking with each passing year. The Templars' castles stood firm, their knights fought on, but the tide was relentless. Their wealth and discipline, once their greatest assets, now seemed insufficient against the unified might of their foes. In Europe, the whispers of envy grew sharper, the order's power a lightning rod for suspicion. Picture a Templar standing alone on a cliff overlooking the sea, his mantle billowing, his thoughts heavy with the weight of a mission under siege. The Holy Land, once a beacon of hope, was slipping away, and the Templars' role as its guardians hung by a thread. As they faced the dawn of a new century, a darker question loomed. What new threats would rise to challenge their sacred vow, and could even their unyielding faith withstand the gathering storm? As the 13th century dawned, a chill settled over the Holy Land, not from the winds that swept the deserts, but from a growing unease that coiled like a serpent in the hearts of men. The Knights Templar, their white mantles and crimson crosses still a beacon to the faithful, stood as pillars amidst the crumbling Crusader kingdoms. Picture a Templar knight in the shadowed halls of their Acre preceptory, his armor set aside, his hands clasped in prayer as the distant call of a muezzin drifts through the night. The order's fortresses held firm, their wealth sustained the fight, but a new threat was rising, not from the swords of Saladin's heirs, but from the murmurs of doubt that echoed across Christendom. Whispers of heresy, faint as the rustle of leaves, began to swirl around the Templars, their power and secrecy now a double-edged blade that cut at their own foundations. Imagine the scene in a European court, perhaps in Paris or London, where candlelight flickers on tapestries and the air hums with the soft clink of goblets. Nobles and clerics gather, their voices low as they speak of the Templars' vast wealth, their impregnable castles, their independence from all but the Pope. A lord, his coffers strained by debts to the order, might jest about their hidden treasures, his words laced with envy. A bishop, irked by their exemption from tithes, might question their rituals, so private and austere. These were not yet accusations, but seeds that found fertile ground in a world where the Crusades were faltering, and blame was a currency as valuable as gold. The Templars' secrecy, born of their monastic discipline, fueled these whispers. Picture their preceptory in Cyprus, where knights gather for a chapter meeting, the doors barred, the windows shuttered. Only those who had taken the vow could enter, their rituals cloaked in the sanctity of their rule. They prayed in Latin, their voices a solemn chant, and discussed matters of war and finance with a candor reserved for brothers. To them, this privacy was a necessity, a shield against the chaos of a fractured world. But to outsiders, it was a veil, behind which rumors of strange rites and secret oaths began to take shape. A disgruntled squire, dismissed for breaking the rule, might whisper to a tavern crowd of mysteries he had glimpsed, his words exaggerated by ale and resentment. In the Holy Land, the Templars' struggles added weight to these murmurs. The Crusader states were shrinking, their hold on cities like Acre and Tyre precarious. Picture a Templar commander riding out from Chastel Blanc, his men weary from endless patrols, their numbers dwindling with each skirmish. The Fourth Crusade, diverted to Constantinople in 1204, had sapped Christendom's resources, leaving the Templars to bear the brunt of defending the Levant. Their courage was unquestioned, their sacrifices many, but the losses piled high. A failed campaign might spark blame, with some pointing to the Templars' strategies or their pride as the cause. These criticisms, often unfair, fed the narrative that the order was not infallible, that their power might conceal flaws. The Templars' wealth, once a lifeline, now cast a long shadow. Imagine a merchant in Venice, his ledger balanced by a Templar loan, muttering about the order's vast estates, lands that rivaled those of kings. Their banking system, a marvel of efficiency, made them indispensable, but it also made them vulnerable. Kings and nobles, indebted to the Templars, began to see their wealth as a threat, a power that dwarfed their own. In France, King Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, eyed the order with particular interest. His treasury was strained, his ambitions vast, and the Templars' gold, stored in their Paris preceptory, a fortress within his own capital, was a temptation too great to ignore. The Church, too, began to stir. While the Pope remained their protector, local clergy grew increasingly vocal. Picture a cathedral in Toulouse, where a bishop preaches against the Templars' privileges, his words sharp with resentment. Their exemption from taxes and their direct allegiance to Rome set them apart, creating friction with those who felt overshadowed. Some clerics whispered of unnatural practices, their accusations vague but insidious. These were not formal charges, but they lingered in the air, repeated in letters and sermons, each retelling adding a layer of suspicion. The Templars, steadfast in their mission, seemed oblivious to the gathering storm. Picture a knight standing watch on the walls of Tortosa, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his thoughts on the pilgrims he must protect. The whispers of heresy were distant, drowned out by the immediate demands of war. Yet these murmurs were not harmless. They spread like wildfire, carried by travelers and traders, reaching the ears of those who saw opportunity in the order's vulnerabilities. A knight who had once been a hero might now be viewed with suspicion, his crimson cross a symbol not just of faith, but of secrets untold. As the early 1300s approached, the Templars faced a world where their triumphs were overshadowed by doubt. Their castles stood strong, their swords sharp, but the ground beneath them was shifting. In Europe, the whispers grew louder, fueled by envy, debt, and the failures of the Crusades. In the Holy Land, their mission hung by a thread, the loss of Jerusalem a wound that refused to heal. Picture a Templar in a quiet moment, his mantle folded beside him, his heart heavy with the weight of a vow that demanded everything. The order had risen to unparalleled heights, but now a shadow loomed, its edges sharp with accusation. As the new century unfolded, a question hung heavy in the air. Could the Templars withstand the rising tide of suspicion, or would their sacred vow be tested by a force more insidious than any battlefield? In the autumn of 1307, as a cold mist settled over the streets of Paris, the Knights Templar faced a darkness unlike any they had known. The city's spires loomed through the haze, their shadows falling on the Templar preceptory, a fortress of stone that had once symbolized unyielding strength. Picture a Templar knight within those walls, his white mantle draped over a chair, his hands steady as he sharpens his sword by candlelight. The air is heavy with the scent of wax and parchment, but an unease lingers, unspoken yet palpable. Across Europe, the order's wealth and influence had made them legends. But now, in the heart of France, a king's ambition was about to unleash a betrayal that would shake the very foundations of their sacred vow. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, was a man of cold calculation, his eyes sharp with the hunger of a ruler whose treasury was bled dry by wars and extravagance. Picture him in his palace, his advisors gathered around a table strewn with ledgers, their voices low as they speak of the Templars' gold. The order's Paris preceptory, a stronghold within the city, held vaults rumored to brim with coin, wealth that could refill a king's coffers and fuel his dreams of power. But Philip's gaze was not merely on their riches. It was on their independence, their allegiance to the Pope, their power that rivaled his own. To a king who saw himself as God's anointed, the Templars' autonomy was a challenge, their crimson crosses a rebuke. The whispers of heresy, which had simmered for years, now found a willing architect in Philip. Imagine a secret council, the room dim, the king's voice a low hiss as he outlines his plan. For years, the Templars' secrecy and wealth had fueled rumors of strange rites, of hidden treasures, of disloyalty to the crown. Philip seized these murmurs, shaping them into a weapon. He dispatched spies, gathered disgruntled former Templars, and wove a tapestry of accusations. Idolatry, blasphemy, even devil worship. These charges, though baseless, were crafted with care, designed to inflame the faithful and justify a strike against an order that answered to no one but Rome. On Friday, October 13, 1307, the king's plan struck like a thunderbolt. Picture the dawn breaking over Paris, the city stirring as royal soldiers, their armor glinting, move through the streets with sealed orders. At the Templar preceptory, the gates are forced open, the air filled with the clatter of boots and the shouts of men. Knights, sergeants, and clerks are dragged from their beds, their hands bound, their faces etched with shock. Across France, from Normandy to Provence, the scene repeats, hundreds of Templars arrested in a single, coordinated sweep. Imagine Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, standing tall as soldiers seize him, his eyes blazing with defiance even as chains encircle his wrists. The king's orders were clear. The Templars were to be tried for heresy, their wealth confiscated, their power broken. The charges were a litany of horrors, each more outlandish than the last. The Templars, Philip claimed, spat on the cross during their secret initiations, worshipped a mysterious idol called Baphomet, and engaged in unspeakable acts. Picture a royal scribe reading these accusations in a crowded hall, the words met with gasps from onlookers. To the Templars, these claims were an affront, a mockery of their sacred vow. A knight, his mantle stripped from him, might stand in a cell, his mind reeling at the betrayal. They had fought for Christendom, bled for the Holy Land, yet now they were branded as heretics by the very crown they had served with loans and counsel. Philip's motives were layered, his ambition cloaked in piety. His treasury was desperate, drained by wars with England and Flanders. The Templars' wealth, gold, estates, and their vast banking network was a prize too tempting to resist. But more than coin, Philip sought control. The Templars' independence, their direct allegiance to the Pope, was a thorn in his side. By destroying them, he could assert his dominance over church and state, sending a message to all who dared defy him. Imagine his satisfaction as reports of the arrests reached him, the Templar preceptories sealed, their treasures seized. Yet, he needed the Church's blessing to make his actions lawful, and so he turned to Pope Clement V, a Frenchman under his influence, residing in Avignon. The Pope, caught between Philip's pressure and his duty to the Templars, hesitated. Picture a tense meeting in Poitiers, the Pope's face pale as Philip's envoys pressed their case. Clement, weak and indebted to the king, issued a reluctant order for the Templars' arrest across Christendom, though his heart was not in it. In England, Aragon, and Cyprus, rulers moved slowly, some skeptical of the charges, others wary of the Templars' power. But in France, Philip's will was iron. The arrests were only the beginning. The trials would be the true crucible, designed to extract confessions and dismantle the order piece by piece. For the Templars, the world had turned upside down. Imagine a knight in a damp cell, his prayers whispered in the dark, his thoughts turning to the pilgrims he once protected, the battles he fought under the Crimson Cross. The Order's mission, once a beacon of hope, now seemed a distant dream. Their wealth, their castles, their very faith were now weapons turned against them. As the machinery of Philip's justice ground forward, the Templars faced a trial not just of their bodies, but of their souls. The king's betrayal had struck deep, but the worst was yet to come: torture, lies, and a fire that would consume their legacy. As the knights languished in chains, a question burned in their hearts. Could their sacred vow endure this onslaught, or would the Templars' light be extinguished by a king's ambition? In the dim, suffocating cells of Paris, where the air reeked of damp stone and despair, the Knights Templar faced a crucible that tested not just their bodies but the very essence of their sacred vow. It was 1307, and the world they had known, glorious battles, solemn prayers, the trust of pilgrims, was unraveling under the weight of King Philip IV's accusations. Picture a Templar knight, his white mantle torn from him, his wrists raw from iron chains, sitting in the flickering light of a single torch. The accusations of heresy, spitting on the cross, worshipping idols, defying God, hung like a noose, each word a betrayal of the Order's centuries of sacrifice. The trials that followed the arrests were not a search for truth but a theater of torment, designed to break the Templars and justify their destruction. Imagine the scene in a grim chamber beneath the royal palace, where the king's inquisitors, their faces shadowed, interrogate a Templar sergeant. The air is thick with the stench of sweat and fear, the walls echoing with the clank of chains. Philip's men, armed with papal sanction and ruthless intent, employed torture to extract confessions. The rack stretched limbs until joints cracked. Hot irons seared flesh. Water was forced down throats until breath failed. A knight, his body racked with pain, might gasp out a confession, any words to end the agony, admitting to crimes he had never committed. Picture his eyes, once bright with zeal, now hollow with betrayal as he speaks of spitting on the cross, a lie torn from him by torment. These confessions, coerced and contradictory, were recorded with meticulous care, each one a brick in the case against the Order. The charges were grotesque, a litany of blasphemies crafted to shock the faithful. The Templars, it was claimed, worshipped a head called Baphomet, denied Christ, and practiced forbidden rites in their secret chapters. Imagine a public reading of these accusations in a cathedral square, the crowd gasping, some weeping, others shouting in anger. To the Templars, who had bled for the Holy Land, these claims were a mockery of their faith. A knight chained in a cell might whisper psalms to himself, clinging to the rule that had guided his life, even as his brothers' screams echoed through the stone corridors. The inquisitors cared not for truth. Their goal was submission, their methods a violation of the very God the Templars served. Across France, the trials unfolded with relentless precision. Picture a courtroom in Poitiers, where Templar leaders, including Grand Master Jacques de Molay, face their accusers. De Molay, a warrior of nearly 70, stands with a dignity unbroken by chains, his voice steady as he denies the charges. But the weight of torture had broken many. Some nights their spirits crushed, confessed to whatever was demanded, their words twisted to condemn the Order. Others, defiant, refused to yield, their silence a testament to their vow. Imagine the anguish of a young sergeant, his body bruised, torn between loyalty to his brothers and the hope of sparing himself further pain. The trials were a labyrinth of lies, where truth was a casualty and justice a sham. The Pope, Clement V, wavered under Philip's pressure. Picture a tense meeting in Avignon, The papal court a gilded cage where Clement, frail and beholden to the king, struggles to assert his authority. He ordered investigations across Christendom, but in France, Philip controlled the process. In England and Aragon, where rulers were less eager to condemn, Templars faced questioning but often escaped the worst tortures. Yet even there, the accusations cast a pall, their honor tarnished by the king's campaign. Imagine an English Templar, released after a lenient trial, standing outside a preceptory now seized by the crown, his heart heavy with the knowledge that his order was crumbling. The human cost was staggering. Picture a Templar knight, once proud and resolute, now a shadow of himself, his body scarred, his spirit battered. Some died under torture, their names lost to history. Others languished in cells, their prayers a faint whisper against the clank of chains. Families of Templar sergeants, who had served as squires or farmers on the order's estates, were cast into poverty as lands were confiscated. In villages across France, the sight of a crimson cross, once a symbol of hope, now sparked fear. The Templars' mission, to protect, to serve, to pray, had been twisted into a narrative of betrayal, their sacrifices erased by the king's ambition. Yet amidst the torment, there were glimmers of defiance. Imagine Jacques de Molay, summoned before a papal commission in 1310, retracting his coerced confession. His voice, though weakened by years in chains, rings with conviction as he defends the order's honor. Other Templars followed, their courage a spark in the darkness. Picture a group of knights in Paris, gathered in a guarded hall, shouting their innocence to the assembled clerics, their words a final stand against the lies. These acts of resistance, though brave, could not halt the tide. Philip's will was relentless, his inquisitors unyielding, and the Pope's support too weak to save them. As the trials dragged on, the Templars' world grew smaller. Their preceptories stood empty, their vaults plundered, their banners torn down. Picture a lone knight, released but branded a heretic, wandering a road he once patrolled, his mantle gone, his purpose shattered. The order, once a pillar of Christendom, was being dismantled, its knights scattered, its legacy stained. The trials had stripped them of more than freedom. They had stolen their honor, their brotherhood, their faith in a world they had served. As the shadow of the stake loomed, a question burned in the hearts of those who remained. Could their sacred vow survive this crucible, or would the Templars' light be extinguished by the flames of betrayal? As the spring of 1314 cast a pale light over Paris, the city hummed with the weight of a final reckoning. The Isle des Juifs, a small island in the Seine, stood cloaked in mist, its muddy banks soon to bear witness to an act that would echo through the centuries. The Knights Templar, once the proud guardians of the Holy Land, now languished in chains, their preceptories seized, their honor stained by years of trials and torment. At the heart of their tragedy stood Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, a man whose name would become a symbol of defiance and sacrifice. Picture him in a dank cell, his white beard streaked with gray, his eyes still burning with the fire of a vow unbroken, even as the world he had served turned against him. Imagine the scene in late 1310, as de Molay, now in his late 60s, faces a papal commission in Paris. His body is worn from years of imprisonment, his wrists scarred by chains, but his voice carries the strength of a warrior who has faced death on countless battlefields. He retracts his coerced confession, declaring the Templars' innocence with a clarity that silences the room. The charges, heresy, idolatry, blasphemy, are a mockery, he insists, a fabrication born of greed and envy. Picture his weathered hands gripping the edge of a table, his crimson cross long stripped from him, yet his spirit unbowed. His words, a plea for justice, ripple through the gathered clerics, but King Philip IV's shadow looms large, his will a noose tightening around the order. Philip, relentless in his campaign, pressed for the Templars' destruction. Picture a royal council in 1312, the air thick with tension as envoys from the king confront Pope Clement V at the Council of Vienne. The Pope, frail and under Philip's sway, faced an impossible choice: defend the Templars, who had served the Church for nearly 2 centuries, or yield to the king's demands. Clement, his authority weakened by his residence in Avignon, chose the latter. In a bull titled Vox in Excelso, he dissolved the order of the Knights Templar, not for proven guilt, but for the scandal that tainted their name. Imagine the moment the decree is read, a hush falling over the assembly, the weight of betrayal settling like dust on the shoulders of those who once revered the Crimson Cross. The dissolution was a death sentence for the order, but for Jacques de Molay and his fellow Templars, the ordeal was far from over. Picture the Grand Master in a Paris cell, the walls cold and damp, his thoughts turning to the knights he had led, men who had fought beside him at Acre, who had guarded pilgrims under the desert sun. Many had died under torture, others languished in obscurity, their fates sealed by the king's ambition. De Molay, as their leader, bore the weight of their suffering, his prayers a quiet defiance against the lies that had undone them. The Templars' wealth, their castles, their very legacy had been plundered, yet de Molay clung to the vow that had defined his life: to serve God, to protect the faith, to honor his brothers. On March 18, 1314, the final act unfolded. Picture the Isle des Juifs at dusk, a wooden pyre erected on the riverbank, its timbers dark against the fading light. A crowd gathers: nobles, clergy, common folk, their faces a mix of curiosity and dread. Jacques de Molay, alongside Geoffrey de Charny, the Templar preceptor of Normandy, is led to the stake. His frame is gaunt, his step slow, but his head is held high, his gaze steady. The charges are read once more, a litany of falsehoods, and the crowd is offered a final chance for confessions to spare their lives. Imagine de Molay's voice, hoarse but resolute, ringing out across the river. "I confess only the sins of the Order's enemies who have betrayed us with lies." He denies the heresy, proclaims the Templars' innocence, and calls upon God to judge those who have wronged them. The flames are lit, their crackle rising with the smoke as the fire takes hold. Picture de Molay standing tall, his mantle gone but his spirit cloaked in the memory of the Crimson Cross. The crowd watches in silence, some weeping, others turning away as the flames climb higher. Legend holds that de Molay's final words were a curse, summoning Philip and Clement to face divine judgment within a year. Whether true or not, his defiance burned brighter than the pyre, a testament to a vow that no fire could consume. Geoffrey de Charny, too, meets his end with courage, his loyalty to the order unbroken to the last. The execution marked the end of the Templars as an order, their preceptories seized, their knights scattered. Imagine a lone survivor, perhaps a sergeant who escaped the arrests, standing on a distant hill, watching the smoke rise over Paris. His heart is heavy with grief, his future uncertain, yet the memory of de Molay's stand lingers, a spark of hope amidst the ashes. In England, Aragon, and other lands, some Templars were absorbed into other orders or released, but their legacy was forever scarred. The Hospitallers, their rival order, inherited much of their wealth, but the Templars' spirit could not be transferred. The fall of Jacques de Molay was more than the death of a man. It was the silencing of an ideal. Picture the Seine flowing quietly past the charred remains of the pyre, the city settling into an uneasy calm. Philip had his victory, his treasury enriched, his power asserted. Clement, racked by illness, would die within months, and Philip himself followed before the year's end, lending weight to the legend of de Molay's curse. The Templars' story, once a saga of valor and faith, now ended in flames, but its echoes would endure. As the smoke cleared and the crowds dispersed, a question lingered in the air. What secrets had died with the Grand Master, and what mysteries would rise from the ashes of the Templars' fall? As the embers of Jacques de Molay's pyre faded into the twilight of 1314, the Seine flowed silently past the Isle des Juifs, carrying away the ashes of the Knights Templar. The order, once a towering pillar of Christendom, had been reduced to a memory, its preceptories plundered, its knights scattered or slain. Yet in the quiet of that spring evening, as the stars emerged over Paris, the Templars' story did not end. It lingered, like a whisper in the stone halls of their abandoned fortresses, like a shadow cast by their crimson cross. Picture a lone pilgrim, standing on a hill in the Holy Land, gazing at the ruins of Crac des Chevaliers, its walls silent but heavy with the weight of a lost legacy. The Templars were gone, but their echoes reverberated through time, their mysteries weaving a tapestry of myth that would captivate the world for centuries. Imagine the years that followed, as the Templars' fall sent ripples across Europe. In villages from Aragon to England, tales of their courage and betrayal were told by firelight, each retelling adding a layer of legend. The order's sudden dissolution, orchestrated by King Philip IV's greed and Pope Clement V's weakness, left a void that fueled speculation. Picture a merchant in a bustling Florence market, whispering of Templar treasures hidden in secret vaults, gold and relics spirited away before the arrests. These stories, born of their vast wealth and secretive rituals, grew into myths of a lost hoard, perhaps buried beneath the Temple Mount, perhaps guarded by descendants of the order. The truth was likely simpler. Their wealth was seized by Philip and the Hospitallers, but the allure of hidden riches proved irresistible. The Templars' architectural legacy endured, their castles standing as silent witnesses to their glory. Picture a traveler in the 14th century, passing the towering walls of Tortosa, its stones weathered but unyielding. These fortresses, once alive with the clatter of hooves and the chant of prayers, now housed other orders or crumbled into ruin. In Europe, their preceptories, some granted to the Hospitallers, others claimed by kings, became relics of a bygone era. Yet, their design, blending Frankish strength with Eastern ingenuity, influenced castles for generations. Imagine a mason in Portugal, studying a Templar preceptory's rounded towers, incorporating their secrets into a new fortress. The Templars' hands had shaped the medieval world, their stones a foundation for the future. Their spiritual legacy, too, lingered. The Templars had embodied a unique ideal, warriors who prayed, monks who fought, a paradox that inspired both awe and fear. Picture a monk in a Cistercian abbey reading Bernard of Clairvaux's defense of the Templars, his words a reminder of their sacred mission. The idea of the warrior monk lived on, influencing orders like the Teutonic Knights and shaping the chivalric codes of later centuries. Yet, their fall also served as a cautionary tale. The Church, wary of any group growing too powerful, tightened its grip on religious orders, ensuring none could rival the Templars' independence. In courts and cathedrals, their name became a warning. Even the mightiest could fall to envy and betrayal. The myths of the Templars grew wilder with time. Imagine a 15th-century scholar, his quills scratching by candlelight, writing of the Templars' supposed links to the Holy Grail or ancient mysteries. These tales, fueled by their secretive rituals and the mystery of Baphomet, wove them into the fabric of esoteric lore. By the Renaissance, they were no longer just knights, but symbols of hidden knowledge, their crimson cross a cipher for secrets lost to the flames. Picture a secret society in the 18th century, claiming descent from the Templars, their rituals a blend of history and invention. From Freemasonry to modern fiction, the Templars' shadow stretched far, their story reshaped by each generation's dreams and fears. In the Holy Land, their absence was keenly felt. Picture a pilgrim in 1320 walking the road to Jerusalem, now guarded by others, his heart heavy with the memory of the Templars' protection. The Crusader kingdoms, already faltering, collapsed entirely by 1291 with the fall of Acre, a city the Templars had once defended with their lives. Their mission, to protect the faithful, lived on in other orders, but none carried the same mystique. The loss of the Holy Land, coupled with the Templars' destruction, marked the end of an era, the crusading spirit fading into memory. Yet, the Templars' sacrifice, their unwavering commitment to their vow, left an indelible mark on the Christian world. Today, the Templars remain a fascination, their story a blend of fact and legend. Picture a modern historian, standing in the ruins of a Templar preceptory, her fingers tracing the weathered stone where a crimson cross once stood. Books, films, and games reimagine their tale, casting them as heroes, villains, or keepers of ancient secrets. The truth, though simpler, is no less profound. They were men of faith, bound by a vow that led them through battles, betrayals, and flames. Their legacy is not in hidden treasures, but in their courage, their discipline, their unyielding devotion to a cause greater than themselves. As the stars shine over the silent ruins of their castles, the Templars' story lingers, a lullaby of history that soothes and stirs. Their crimson cross, though faded, still burns in the imagination, a symbol of a time when faith and steel were one. Picture that final knight, standing in the shadow of a forgotten fortress, his heart echoing with the vows of his brothers. The Templars are gone, but their echoes remain, whispering of a world where honor was tested by fire, and a vow could outlast even death. What secrets did they carry to their graves, and what dreams will their story inspire in the ages yet to come?